On August 7, 1819, one of the most important battles of Latin America's independence from the Spanish Empire was fought. The Battle of Boyacá is considered the most important battle during the Latin American Wars of Independence because it was the first time a Spanish colonial army was decisively defeated. It all but secured the independence of New Granada, present-day Colombia, and marked the beginning of the end for the Spanish Empire. I've been fascinated by South America since I was young. When my family and I would visit Colombia, we would spend our days exploring the vibrant streets of Bogotá, marveling at the historical sites and sampling delicious Colombian food. The battle took place on August 7, 1819, near the town of Boyacá in what is now central Colombia. By the time the two armies met at the Boyacá Bridge, the Royalist force outnumbered the Republican troops for 2-3. The Royalist army consisted of seasoned soldiers who had experience fighting in the Spanish colonial army. But they were determined to win the battle and secure their country's independence. In the early hours of August 7, 1819, the Republican army began its assault on the Royalist positions. But to everyone's surprise, the Royalist troops held their ground and fought back fiercely. The Republicans were forced to retreat, and Bolívar knew that something had to change if they were going to win the battle. The battle is considered a turning point in the history of the region because it demonstrated that colonial armies could be defeated and independence was possible. The news of the victory spread quickly throughout Latin America, inspiring other independence movements and giving hope to those who were fighting for freedom. The Republicans were a diverse group of soldiers, and their ranks included farmers, merchants, students, and former members of the Spanish colonial army who had switched sides. This was the first of several victories that Bolívar would achieve during the independence movement. Thousands of people were killed or wounded during the war, and many families were torn apart by the conflict. What did you find most interesting about the Battle of Boyacá? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you want to learn more about Colombia, check out my other videos. Thank you for watching, and I hope you like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. Thanks for watching. Additionally, the dream of a unified Grand Colombia that Bolívar had envisioned soon fell apart due to internal disputes and power struggles. Despite these challenges, the Colombian people have a lot to celebrate. The Battle of Boyacá was a pivotal moment in their history and a testament to the courage and determination of those who fought for their country's independence. It was a victory not just for Colombia, but for all of Latin America and the world. And he would go on to liberate Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia from Spanish colonial rule. The legacy of the Battle of Boyacá lives on in Colombia today. The site of the battle is now a national park, and there are several monuments and memorials dedicated to the fallen soldiers. The Colombian military also celebrates the anniversary of the battle each year, and it is a day of national pride and remembrance. Despite their lack of experience, the Republicans were highly motivated and eager to fight for their country's freedom. To make matters worse, the Republican troops had suffered heavy losses in the weeks leading up to the battle. Many of them had been killed or wounded in previous engagements with the Royalists, and they were exhausted and demoralized. Many of them were loyalists who genuinely believed in the divine right of the Spanish king to rule over the colonies. On the other hand, the Republican troops were mostly made up of volunteers who had little to no experience in warfare. He ordered his cavalry to cross the Arauca River and attack the Royalist troops from behind. The cavalry was led by Lieutenant Colonel José Antonio Páez, who was known for his bravery and skill in battle. As the cavalry charged into the fray, the Royalist troops were caught off guard and their ranks began to crumble. The Republicans seized the moment and launched a second assault, this time with renewed vigor. They were farmers, merchants, and students who had taken up arms to fight for their country's independence. The Spanish colonial army was not used to such aggressive tactics, and they were unable to mount an effective defense against the Republicans. As the battle raged, Bolívar and his troops pushed forward, determined to capture the bridge and break the Royalist line. Finally, after hours of intense fighting, the Republicans succeeded in capturing the bridge. The Royalist army was in full retreat, and the Spanish colonial rule in New Granada was effectively over. Despite this disparity in experience, the Republican army was well led by Bolívar, who had a brilliant military mind and an inspiring presence. The opposing sides were led by two prominent figures, Simón Bolívar and José María Barreiro. Bolívar was a Venezuelan general and one of the most important leaders of the independence movement in Latin America. He is often referred to as the liberator for his successful campaigns in several South American countries. On the other side was Barreiro, a Spanish general who was put in charge of putting down the rebellion in New Granada. My love for the country has only grown since then, and I even lived in Medellin for a year. I can honestly say that Colombia is one of my favorite countries in the world. The bridge was the main route between the cities of Tunja and Bogotá, and controlling it was crucial for both sides. The Royalist army, under the command of General José María Barreiro, was confident in their ability to defeat the Republican forces. They had superior numbers and more experienced soldiers, and they believed that the Republicans would crumble under their attack. The Royalist troops were well equipped with muskets and artillery, and they were organized and disciplined according to the standards of the Spanish colonial army. Their plan was to use their superior firepower to break the Republican lines and capture the bridge. So when I learned about the upcoming bicentennial anniversary of the Battle of Boyacá, I knew I had to make a video about it. Join me as we explore the events leading up to the battle, meet some of the key figures involved, and discover how it played a pivotal role in shaping Latin America forever. And they began to question why they should be subjugated by a distant empire. On August 20, 1810, the colonial government in Bogotá declared independence from Spain and established the Republic of Gran Colombia, which included the modern-day countries of Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. But this was not an easy fight. The Spanish were determined to crush the rebellion and bring their empire back to its former glory. In the early 19th century, Spain was in turmoil. The Napoleonic Wars had weakened the country, and its colonies in Latin America were becoming restless. For years, the Spanish had ruled over these lands with an iron fist, exploiting their resources and oppressing their people, but now the winds of change were blowing. In 1810, news of the French Revolution reached the ears of the Creole, a term used to describe those of European descent born in the Americas. Among the most important battles during the Latin American Wars of Independence was the Battle of Boyacá. In the run-up to the battle, both sides made strategic moves to gain an advantage. On the morning of August 7, 1819, the two armies faced off at the Boyacá Bridge, which spanned a deep gorge in the Andes Mountains. Meanwhile, the Republican army, led by General Simón Bolívar, was outnumbered and outgunned. Despite these challenges, Bolívar refused to give up. He knew that the fate of his country's independence rested on their shoulders, and he was determined to win the battle. At that moment, Bolívar made a bold move that would change the course of the battle. The tide of the battle had turned, and the Royalist army began to falter. With the victory at the Battle of Boyacá, Simón Bolívar and the Republican army had achieved a major victory for the independence movement in Latin America. In the aftermath of the battle, the Spanish colonial government in Bogotá was overthrown and Colombia became an independent nation. However, despite the ultimate success of the Colombian independence movement, it's important to acknowledge that the struggle was not without its costs. As we reflect on the events of August 7, 1819, we are reminded of the power of unity, the importance of fighting for freedom, and the enduring legacy of those who came before us. The year is 1819, and for over a decade, revolutionary sentiment has been growing in the Spanish colonies of South America. Though far from the mother country, news of the French Revolution and the American War of Independence had reached these distant lands, igniting a desire for autonomy and self-governance among the Creoles, the Spanish-born elite. And Venezuela would be decided on a single day of battle. The Royalist army of New Granada was exhausted from months of fighting and low on supplies, and then there was the issue of morale. With the Spanish defeated, A delegation was sent to the city of Bogotá to declare it the capital of the new nation of Gran Colombia. As for the prisoners taken at the battle, most were released after taking an oath of allegiance to the new nation. A handful of officers who had distinguished themselves in the fight were singled out for special honors and given commands in the new army. Every year on August, Colombians come together to commemorate the battle with parades, festivals, and solemn ceremonies. For many, it is a time to reflect on the sacrifices made by those who fought for freedom and independence. In schools across the country, children are taught the heroic deeds of Bolívar and his fellow liberators. They learn about the challenges they faced and the bravery they displayed in the face of adversity. One particularly popular folktale tells the story of a young Colombian boy who raised the first flag of independence on the summit of Mount Boyacá. According to legend, the sight of the green, yellow, and red banner fluttering in the wind inspired the troops below to fight even harder. Though this particular story is likely apocryphal, it nevertheless captures the spirit of the revolution, the idea that ordinary citizens can make an extraordinary difference. Today, this monument commemorates the spot where the flag was raised. So complete was the victory that within a year, all of New Granada had declared independence. It was a pivotal moment that changed the course of history. And yet, despite its importance, it is a battle that most people know nothing about. Hopefully, this video has helped to rectify that. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Thank you for watching. The Spanish were driven out of the country, and the Republic of Gran Colombia was born. Royalist officers knew full well that they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Sure, if you read the history books, you might learn about how Bolívar outgeneraled his Spanish opponent or how the poorly equipped patriots managed to defeat a well-trained royalist army. But those stories only tell part of the tale. The truth is that the Battle of Boyacá was a watershed moment in world history. It marked the beginning of the end for the colonial era. As one historian has put it, Boyacá was to Latin America what Lexington and Concord were to the United States. In other words, it was the first battle in a series of conflicts that would see most of the remaining colonies in Latin America win their independence and usher a new age of nation-states in the Western Hemisphere. The battle began on the morning of August 7, 1819. A small group of light infantry skirmished with the Royalists, pinning them down and preventing any escape. However, following the Spanish defeat at Boyacá, revolutionary movements spread like wildfire across the continent. First came the independence of Venezuela, which was followed by the liberation of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and, yes, even Chile. All told, Spain lost more than half of its empire in just a few decades. For the first time in more than a century, there was more landmass outside of Europe ruled by Europeans. The emergence of these new republics would have profound consequences for the world. First and foremost, it reshaped the global balance of power. No longer could European powers project their strength overseas with the same impunity. The days of uncontested colonialism were over. Second, it opened up new possibilities for international trade and diplomacy. The United States, for example, quickly established itself as a major player in the affairs of Latin America. In fact, President Monroe's famous era of good feelings coincided almost exactly with the independence movements in Latin America. This should come as no surprise given that many of these new states were founded by Americans, such as the United States, or led by Americans' sympathizers, such as Bolívar. Perhaps most importantly, however, the Latin American wars of independence were a massive blow to the prestige of the Spanish monarchy and a massive boon to nationalism around the world. The Spanish had ruled over more territory and more people than any other nation on earth. Their loss of empire was seen as a punishment for past sins and a warning for future misbehavior. From this perspective, the Latin American wars of independence were a necessary step in the maturation of the modern world. They marked the end of an old order and the beginning of a new one. Meanwhile, the rest of the Patriot Army lay hidden in the mountains, biding their time. At noon, Bolívar gave the order to attack. The royalists were caught completely by surprise. They tried to flee, but it was too late. The patriots descended upon them like a mountain torrent, sweeping all before them. By 2 p.m., the battle was over. The royalist commander, General José María Bar, surrendered his sword to Bolívar, and the surviving soldiers melted away into the hills. This is the story of the Battle of Boyacá. Our story begins in the high peaks of the Andes Mountains. The year before, the Spanish had driven the patriots out of the region, and now it was time for them to take it back. Leading the patriots was Venezuelan General Simón Bolívar. But unlike his opponent, Bolívar had a real grasp on the military realities of the situation. He knew that a frontal assault on the well-fortified city of Bogotá would be a waste of men and resources. Instead, he opted to march around it, but this was no easy task. The roads were rough and dangerous, supplies were scarce, and the elements were harsh. Men and animals alike struggled with altitude sickness. At one point, they even ran out of food and had to forage on berries and roots, yet they pressed on. Some historians have called it a military genius and others have called it madness. But either way, by midsummer, Bolívar had managed to get his men around the city and into position behind the Spanish lines. But the vast majority of South America's population comprised of indigenous peoples and mestizos, people of mixed race, who had suffered centuries of oppression and exploitation under the encomiendas system. They too had much to gain from throwing off the shackles of the Spanish Empire. And so it was that when Venezuela first declared independence in 1811, they were soon joined by the other colonies. The Spanish Empire was fighting a war on two fronts. And so it was that in the summer of 1819, the fate of the northern provinces of New Granada, present-day Colombia, but while the Patriot Army was rested and ready to fight, the same could not be said of their enemy. When word of the victory reached the Patriot garrisons in the north, they rose up and seized the cities. But why did this matter? Why is it that we remember the Battle of Boyacá nearly 200 years later? It was not just a battle between two armies. Prior to the 19th century, only the United States and Haiti were free and independent. Today, the legacy of Boyacá lives on in the hearts and minds of millions. As you can probably tell, the Battle of Boyacá is much more than just a footnote in world history. Simón Bolívar, the man who would become known as the Liberator, was one of the most brilliant military leaders in Latin American history. His victories were not merely the result of numerical superiority or good fortune, but before we begin our journey through time, if you love anything to do with strategy, especially if it involves outsmarting your opponent, make sure to stay tuned for more epic tales. But the fruit of a meticulously planned strategy and clever tactical maneuvers that reshaped the course of the independence wars. As the sun rose over the Altiplano Cundiboyacense, the Spanish royalist troops under the command of Lieutenant Colonel José María Barreiro were basking in the belief of an imminent victory. It was a perilous journey. The path was narrow, winding, and extremely slippery due to the recent rains. Now ready to strike, he sent out his forward troops, who descended from their concealed positions and launched a surprise attack. The royalists, taken completely by surprise, could not resist the onslaught. As the sun blazed over the Venezuelan plains near the town of Carabobo, the stage was set for a clash that would decide the fate of the colony. On one side stood the royalist forces, led by the experienced Miguel de la Torre, boasting a force of around 2,500 men, confident in their ability to crush the remaining rebel troops. Opposite them were Simón Bolívar's forces, comprising approximately 3,000 men, tired but resolute after a year of campaigning. The royalists, enjoying the protection of trenches and fortified positions, believed themselves to be invincible. However, what they didn't realize was that they were about to face the full force of Bolívar's strategic brilliance. At the same time, he studied his enemy, the Spanish Viceroyalty of Peru, led by the ruthless José de la Serna, knowing their strengths and weaknesses and exploiting every advantage. One of Bolívar's most significant achievements during this campaign was his alliance with the indigenous population. He attacked Spanish supply lines, disrupting their logistics and forcing them to contend with scarcity. Despite being weakened by disease and dwindling supplies, Bolivar's forces faced off against a larger, better-equipped Spanish army. Yet Bolivar, with his characteristic tenacity, led his men to victory. His victories were not mere accidents of war, but the result of meticulous planning, bold innovation, and an uncanny ability to read the battlefield. Whether it was his audacious maneuvers in the rugged ravines of Boyacá, his brilliant flanking tactic at Carabobo, or his patient, strategic campaign in Peru, each battle showcased a different facet of his genius. He proved that military brilliance wasn't about the size of one's army, but the agility of one's mind and the courage to execute one's vision. His story continues to inspire, reminding us that even in the face of daunting odds, victory is possible to achieve with a brilliant strategy. The battle, often considered the most significant engagement in Latin American history, resulted in the surrender of the Spanish, effectively ending colonial rule in Peru. At the same time, he led his troops in pitched battles, defeating the Spanish forces time and again. It was a campaign marked by innovation, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the cause of independence. Through his alliances, propaganda, and tactical brilliance, he turned the tide of war, securing freedom for Peru and cementing his legacy as one of the greatest military leaders of all time. The Battle of Junin was a pivotal moment in the Peruvian campaign. Here, Bolivar's army, though outnumbered, triumphed over the Spanish, inflicting a heavy toll on their forces. This victory not only boosted morale, but dealt a severe blow to Spanish prestige and power. He understood that the key to victory lay in their support, and he made it a point to honor their traditions, respect their leaders, and address their grievances. This earned him their loyalty and ensured that he had a vast network of allies behind him. The Venezuelan army attacked with the fury of a storm, overwhelming the royalists with their superior position and determination. He understood the power of the written word and used it to his advantage. He published accounts of Spanish atrocities and his own victories, spreading them far and wide to demoralize his enemies and boost his troops' morale. These stories, often exaggerated for effect, played a significant role in shaping public perception of the war. Aware of the enemy's strong fortifications, frontal assaults would have been costly and ineffective. As the royalists prepared for battle, believing themselves to be secure in their trenches, Bolivar's troops moved with stealth and precision, taking positions that would encircle the royalist forces. The royalist trenches, once thought to be impenetrable, were breached with ease, and the royalist ranks, caught off guard, crumbled under the pressure. As the battle raged, it became clear that the royalists were fighting a losing battle. Their commander, Miguel de la Torre, realizing the futility of further resistance, surrendered. And with that, the fate of Venezuela was sealed. The victory at Carabobo was a testament to Bolivar's strategic genius. Through careful planning and flawless execution, he had turned the tables on a seemingly invincible enemy, proving that even the strongest defenses could be breached with skill and determination. This victory not only secured independence for Venezuela, but served as a beacon of hope for other Latin American colonies yearning for freedom. Meanwhile, the royalists, lulled into a false sense of security by their strong fortifications, remained blissfully unaware of the danger that was closing in on them from all sides. As dawn broke on June 24, 1821, Bolivar's forces sprung their trap. Attacking from unexpected angles, they overwhelmed the royalists, who found themselves under siege with no hope of reinforcement or retreat. So instead, Bolivar opted for a daring flanking maneuver that would isolate the royalists and force their surrender. However, the execution of this plan was fraught with challenges. Bolivar's troops were fatigued and needed rest. The plan required secrecy and precision timing, and the slightest mishap could jeopardize everything. Despite being on lower ground, Bolivar's forces were able to outmaneuver and defeat the royalists who were on the high ground. By utilizing the natural barriers of the ravines, Bolivar had turned the very geography of the land into a tool of war, a testament to his military genius. The battle ended in a resounding victory for Bolivar, shattering the royalist defenses and securing a crucial step towards independence. The ravines were flanked by sheer drops and hidden crevices that threatened to swallow any misstep. From the ashes of the Battle of Boyacá, a new era began, an era where the dream of freedom was no longer a distant hope, but a tangible reality. The Battle of Boyacá was not merely a battle, but a revolution in strategy, proving that even the most daunting terrain could be conquered with skill and determination. But Bolivar, with his intimate knowledge of the region, guided his men through the treacherous terrain, keeping them safe from the worst of the ravine's dangers. On the other side of the ravines, however, the situation was quite different. The royalists stationed on the higher ground had a clear view of the approach of Bolivar's forces. From their vantage point, they watched with amusement as the ragtag group of rebels struggled to navigate the difficult terrain. They believed that the ravines would protect them, that the treacherous landscape would stop Bolivar in his tracks. Little did they know that Bolivar had something else planned. Their position atop the eastern slopes of the Bogotá savanna seemed impregnable, protected as they were by deep ravines and steep cliffs. Yet what the Spaniards failed to realize was that their supposed sanctuary was about to become their tomb. For Simón Bolívar, the Venezuelan general with dreams of liberating Colombia from colonial rule, had chosen these very ravines, known locally as ravines, as the site for his most audacious maneuver yet. Across battlefields stretching from the plains of Venezuela to the highlands of Peru, Bolivar proved that a trained military mind. However, the vast ravines that lay before them, seemingly impassable due to their rugged terrain, initially appeared to be an insurmountable obstacle. What made matters worse was the hostile indigenous tribes inhabiting these regions, known for their fierce resistance against anyone attempting to traverse their territory. Yet while the Spaniards saw only an impassable barrier and the indigenous people saw only a challenge to their sovereignty, Bolivar saw opportunity. With a keen understanding of the terrain and the capabilities of his troops, Bolivar decided to lead his men through these very ravines that the others had deemed impassable. And the ability to adapt to changing circumstances were the decisive factors in achieving victory. Let us now travel back in time to relive three battles that immortalized Simón Bolívar as a master strategist. Battle of Boyacá, August 7, 1819. Bolívar's army, though numerically inferior to the Spanish forces, was well rested after 2 days of marching and eager to engage the enemy. As the Spanish waited confidently on their elevated positions, expecting the terrain to protect them, Bolívar and his troops began their ascent. As night fell, Bolívar completed his masterful maneuver, positioning his troops above and behind the unsuspecting Spanish. But this victory was not just a military triumph. It was a turning point in the war, a beacon of hope for the people struggling for independence. Battle of Carabobo, June 24, 1821. While the Royalists reveled in their apparent security, Bolívar and his second-in-command, Santander, devised a plan of attack that would turn the tide of the war in their favor. Yet despite the odds, Bolívar's team pulled off the maneuver flawlessly. With his army strategically positioned, Bolívar unleashed a relentless assault. Final campaign, 1823 to 1824. Simón Bolívar's final campaign was nothing short of a masterclass in military strategy and psychological warfare. His goal, to liberate Peru from Spanish colonial rule, was fraught with challenges. The terrain was unforgiving, the enemy was powerful, and the road to victory was long and arduous, but Bolívar was undeterred. He began his campaign by winning over the hearts and minds of the local population, ensuring a steady supply of provisions and intelligence. Another crucial aspect of Bolívar's strategy was his use of propaganda. As his army advanced, Bolívar employed a combination of hit-and-run tactics and conventional warfare. However, the final battle of the campaign, the Battle of Ayacucho, proved to be the most grueling. In conclusion, Bolívar's final campaign was a masterpiece of military strategy and perseverance. In the annals of history, few military commanders have left a legacy as indelible as that of Simón Bolívar. On August 7, 1819, On a remote stretch of road near the village of Boyacá in what was then New Granada, now Colombia, a confrontation of arms took place that would reverberate through the corridors of history. This wasn't just any battle, it was a clash between dreams, between those who sought to perpetuate colonial rule and those who yearned for freedom and self-determination. It was a clash between two worlds. On one side stood the Spanish colonial authorities backed by the prestige and resources of one of the largest empires in history. The Creole elite, who were of Spanish descent but born in the Americas, resented the restrictions placed upon them by the colonial government. They were eager to end Spanish monopoly on trade and assume control over the economy themselves. Bolívar, a wealthy Creole from Venezuela, was a charismatic leader and military strategist who dreamt of a united and independent Colombia. Santander, a member of the Provincial Council of Bogotá, was a brilliant tactician and administrator. Miners from the Venezuelan Montana soldiers from Ecuador and foreigners who had joined the cause across the forbidding Andes. Morillo, a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, was a ruthless and cunning commander. When Bolívar and his men finally crossed the Andes into New Granada, they found the Spanish forces ill-prepared for their arrival. The battle was short and intense. The Spanish, taken by surprise and outnumbered, were no match for the battle-hardened patriots. The Llaneros, with their knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics, proved to be formidable opponents. Within days, Bolívar and his men entered Bogotá, where they were greeted as liberators. The city had been largely spared from the violence of the war, and the patriots wasted no time in establishing a new government. Within minutes, the Spanish were routed, their ranks shattered. Every August, the nation comes together to commemorate the day with parades, cultural events, and solemn ceremonies. It's a reminder of the cost of oppression and the price of liberty. Let us ensure that their stories continue to inspire generations to come, reminding us that the pursuit of liberty and justice is a timeless and universal endeavor. In the annals of world history, the Battle of Boyacá stands as a beacon, illuminating the path for those who dare to dream of a world free from colonial shackles. Boyacá is more than just a battle in Colombian memory. It's a defining moment in the nation's soul. The following year, Bolívar presided over the Congress of Angostura, which officially transformed the region into Gran Colombia, a united state comprising present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. The ensuing confrontation was swift and decisive. On August 7, 1819, two Spanish battalions encountered a detachment of Llaneros near the village of Boyacá. According to legend, Bolívar himself disarmed Barreiro and escorted him to the edge of the battlefield, ensuring his safe passage. This act of magnanimity was a testament to Bolívar's character and his commitment to the principles of the revolution. What followed was a display of military brilliance. He had successfully crushed rebellions in various parts of Latin America, and he was determined to do the same in New Granada. He deployed his troops across the region, anticipating an imminent attack by the patriots. The battle had not only won Colombia its freedom, it had also established Simón Bolívar as one of the most revered figures in Latin American history. The journey was fraught with peril. The army suffered from lack of supplies, bitter cold, and attacks from both the elements and Spanish forces. Yet they pressed on, driven by the dream of freedom and the promise of a new dawn for New Granada. He played a pivotal role during the September 1810 uprising. At the same time, the indigenous and Afro-American populations suffered under a brutal system of forced labor and racial hierarchy. The seeds of rebellion were sown. Their goal was nothing short of audacious, crossing the impenetrable Andes Mountains and entering New Granada from the south, where they hoped to rally support for the independence cause. The odds were stacked against them. The Spanish colonial army was a well-trained, battle-hardened force equipped with modern weaponry. The terrain they had chosen to traverse was treacherous, with snow-capped peaks and icy passes that challenged the limits of human endurance. On the other stood a ragtag assembly of rebels, Creoles and mestizos, united by a common desire for independence. Inspired by the successful revolutions in Haiti and the United States, many Latin American colonies were beginning to question the legitimacy of Spanish rule. The situation was further complicated by the turmoil in Spain itself. The Napoleonic Wars had significantly weakened the Spanish monarchy, leaving the colonies with little effective oversight. It was a David and Goliath story set against the backdrop of a waning empire and the rising tide of nationalism. This is the story of the Battle of Boyacá, a battle that marked the turning point of Colombian history. In the first quarter of the 19th century, the winds of change were sweeping across the Americas. In New Granada, which encompassed present-day Colombia, Venezuela, and Panama, the embers of discontent had been burning for years. By 1810, the situation had reached a boiling point. In the summer of 1810, a group of Creole intellectuals in Bogotá, the capital of New Granada, initiated a revolt against the Spanish crown. Known as the September 1810 Uprising, this rebellion was largely confined to the city. But it did lay the foundation for a broader movement for independence. This was followed by the First Republic of Colombia, which lasted from 1811 to 1816. However, the fledgling republic was unable to withstand the might of the Spanish colonial army. By 1816, the Spanish had reasserted control, plunging the region into a period of repression known as the Reconquista. Amidst this turmoil, two key figures emerged on the stage of history: Simón Bolívar and Francisco de Paula Santander. Bolívar and Santander, along with a small band of rebels, fled to Venezuela, where they regrouped and planned their next move. Nevertheless, in one of the most remarkable feats in military history, Bolívar led his ragtag army of Llaneros cowboys from the Venezuelan plains. Meanwhile, in Bogotá, the Spanish colonial government under the command of Pablo Morillo grew increasingly uneasy. But the Spanish were caught off guard by the audacity and timing of Bolívar's strategy. Bolívar, acting as the overall commander, positioned his troops in such a way that the Spanish forces were effectively trapped between two hostile flanks. One of the most iconic images of the battle was the capture of Spanish General José María Barreiro. With the defeat at Boyacá, Spanish resistance in New Granada effectively collapsed. This decisive victory had profound implications. It marked the end of colonial rule in New Granada and paved the way for the birth of the Republic of Colombia. In the years that followed, however, internal divisions and external pressures led to the dissolution of Gran Colombia. Yet the legacy of Boyacá endured. The significance of the Battle of Boyacá resonates deeply within Colombia. The story of Boyacá is a tale of courage, determination, and the unquenchable thirst for freedom. Today, as we stand on the shoulders of those brave souls who fought at Boyacá, let us remember their sacrifice and the ideals they so valiantly defended. And if you want to learn about another battle that changed the course of history, check out the video on the Battle of Hastings. Thanks for watching. Hello friends, on August 7, 1819, a ragtag army of South American revolutionaries defeated the world's most powerful empire in the stunning Battle of Boyacá. The victory of Simón Bolívar and his liberator force over the Spanish was so decisive that it ended any hope of the empire regaining control over the region of New Granada. With this resounding success, Bolívar was able to start liberating more regions of South America from the clutches of the Spanish, and he set out to achieve his dream of uniting all of these liberated territories into one single political entity. The first part of his plan went smoothly, and Bolívar's light infantry quickly captured the village without much resistance. At this point, Bolívar ordered his cavalry to charge, which broke through the Spanish lines and caused panic in their ranks. As the Spanish retreated towards San Pablo, they were pursued by Bolívar's infantry and cavalry, who inflicted heavy casualties on them. Historians have attributed the Spanish defeat to a combination of factors, including the difficult terrain, the numerical superiority of the revolutionaries, and the lack of coordination among the Spanish forces. As they expanded their territory, it became clear that the newly independent regions needed to unite in order to protect themselves from future threats. It existed from 1819 to 1831, although its official creation occurred in 1821 during the Congress of Cúcuta, where the first constitution of this united nation was adopted. The delegates gathered in Cúcuta recognized the need for unity and cooperation among the newly independent states to effectively address common challenges, protect their hard-won independence, and advance their collective interests on the international stage. During the Congress, delegates debated various aspects of the proposed union, including its form of government, territorial boundaries, and the means to ensure stability and prosperity for the new nation. The discussions were intense and complex, reflecting the diverse interests and perspectives of the different regions involved. The new nation faced challenges such as limited industrialization and a shortage of foreign investment. They also implemented measures to promote agricultural production, recognizing the importance of this sector in the economy. The government supported land reform initiatives and encouraged the cultivation of cash crops such as coffee and cocoa. These efforts aim to increase agricultural productivity and generate revenue for the state. Moreover, Gran Colombia sought to strengthen its ties with international markets, establishing diplomatic relations with European nations and promoting trade agreements. They actively participated in international congresses and conferences to discuss economic issues and seek cooperation. To address these issues, the central government implemented policies aimed at promoting trade and attracting foreign capital. They introduced reforms to improve infrastructure, including the establishment of new roads and the promotion of navigation on the Magdalena River. How do you think Latin American history would have been different if Gran Colombia had stayed together? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to show your support for this channel. And be sure to tune in next week for another exciting episode. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. These measures were intended to facilitate the transportation of goods and connect different regions of the country, stimulating economic activity. Ultimately, the Congress of Cúcuta resulted in the adoption of a strong centralist constitution, which established a federal republic with a centralized government. This constitutional framework aimed to create a unified and stable state capable of effectively governing the vast and diverse territories included in Gran Colombia. Regional disparities, internal conflicts, and the instability caused by political crises hindered sustained economic growth, and the country continued to face challenges related to inequality and dependence on primary sectors. The new nation was officially proclaimed on July 18, 2021 in Cúcuta, marking the birth of Gran Colombia. The Congress was convened in the city of Cúcuta, located in present-day Colombia, with the aim of establishing a centralized republican government for the recently independent regions. The idea of a unified and integrated region served as an inspiration for subsequent integration movements and supranational organizations in the Americas and beyond. This was mainly due to internal divisions between the centralist and federalist factions, as well as regional conflicts and the rise of caudillos, local strongmen who exerted considerable influence within their territories. These internal tensions ultimately overwhelmed the central government's authority, leading to the fragmentation of the nation. Nevertheless, during its brief existence, Gran Colombia made significant strides in various areas. Although internal divisions and regional conflicts ultimately led to the dissolution of Gran Colombia in 1831, the dream of a united Latin America has endured. Delegates from Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama met, and representatives from other regions were invited to participate as observers. Among the most prominent figures at the Congress were Simón Bolívar, Francisco de Paula Santander, Antonio José de Sucre, and Camilo Torres, all key players in the struggle for independence in the region. And so the idea of Gran Colombia was born. Additionally, the Spanish were hampered by the high altitude of the location, which was unfamiliar to them and negatively affected their performance. Meanwhile, Bolívar's familiarity with the terrain and his strategic decisions played a crucial role in the victory. He successfully used the terrain to his advantage, launching a surprise attack that caught the Spanish off guard. Furthermore, Bolívar's effective leadership and the superior training of the revolutionary forces also contributed significantly to their triumph. In contrast, the Spanish suffered from poor leadership and a lack of unity among their officers, which hindered their ability to mount an effective defense. By the end of the battle, the Spanish had suffered significant losses, with nearly 1,000 dead, 500 wounded, and 2,000 taken prisoner. In contrast, the revolutionaries had suffered relatively light casualties, with 200 killed or wounded. With such a decisive victory, the Spanish were no longer able to pose a serious threat to the revolutionaries, and they abandoned their efforts to recapture Bogotá. However, the situation soon became complicated when two companies of Spanish infantry arrived just in time to prevent Bolívar from crossing the bridge. Despite being outnumbered, these companies put up a fierce fight, but were eventually forced to retreat. Once the bridge was secured, Bolívar's main force engaged the Spanish in a series of frontal assaults, which initially resulted in heavy casualties for the revolutionaries. But as the battle dragged on, the situation started to turn around. So today, let us talk about how the Battle of Boyacá made Simón Bolívar's dream of uniting South America into one country come true. In our previous episode, we talked about the early struggles of Simón Bolívar and his small ragtag army against the numerically superior Spanish forces as they marched across the Andes Mountains. His military government focused on key issues like food distribution, trade regulations, and public works projects to address the urgent needs of the population. One of their first acts was to establish the Intendancy of Bogotá, led by military governor Manuel de Santa Coloma, who played a crucial role in stabilizing the city. The new administration worked to restore order and rebuild infrastructure, but its limited duration prevented long-term progress. Nonetheless, the measures taken during this period provided essential stability, setting the stage for subsequent administrative efforts under the Grand Colombian state. It was a hard and slow journey, and they were low on supplies. But when they finally reached the warm and resource-rich plains of Boyacá, their situation improved dramatically. While Bolívar's army numbered only around 3,000 men, his opponent, the Spanish general José María Barreiro, had 7,000 troops at his disposal. But Bolívar knew that his soldiers were much better trained, and he had a numerical advantage when it came to cavalry and artillery. And so he decided to take on the Spanish head-on. As Bolívar's forces advanced towards the Spanish positions, both armies prepared for battle along a narrow stretch of road that ran through a valley surrounded by high mountains. On one side was the village of Boyacá with a bridge over the nearby river, while on the other side was the town of San Pablo. The Spanish had occupied these positions a few days earlier and had constructed several trenches and breastworks to protect themselves. They were also confident in their ability to defend these positions and had even sent a letter to Bolívar declaring that if he dared to attack them, they would give him a bloody welcome. But Bolívar was undeterred and attacked anyway. His plan was to reach the village of Boyacá before the Spanish could reinforce their position there and then cross the bridge over the river to engage the enemy head-on. The Spanish began to run out of ammunition, and their defense weakened considerably. Following this triumph, Bolívar's attention turned to securing the city and re-establishing order after years of conflict. But as peace returned to the region, many people still wondered why the Spanish had lost so decisively at the Battle of Boyacá. After securing Bogotá, Bolívar and his allies continued to liberate other parts of northern South America from the Spanish, defeating them in battles like the Siege of Cartagena and the Battle of Panama. But what exactly was Gran Colombia? Gran Colombia was a political entity formed by the Union of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama. The Congress of Cúcuta was a historic event that laid the foundation for the first modern attempt at integration in Latin America. Despite its short lifespan, Gran Colombia left a lasting legacy on the political landscape of Latin America. Unfortunately, despite having a relatively strong start, Gran Colombia disintegrated only 12 years after its creation. Regarding its economy, Gran Colombia inherited a fragile economic situation from the colonial era, characterized by social inequality and a dependence on agriculture and mining. Furthermore, Gran Colombia took steps to diversify its economy, encouraging the development of industries such as textiles and manufacturing. However, it is important to note that despite these efforts, Gran Colombia's economy remained vulnerable during its short existence. So what do you think? Do you think Bolivar would have achieved greater success if he had lived longer?